Dave Penyuk of Revenue.com. Good to see you again. We are talking commercial real estate investing. The good, the bad, the ugly. What do you like? What don't you like? What's wonderful about it? What sucks about it? So we're doing a whole video series on this and the differences between commercial real estate investing and residential real estate investing. So today's video, lease differences. What kind of differences are there with a lease with a commercial real estate deal versus a residential? Now again, I always want to reference that commercial real estate in the scope of this video series is referring to retail, office, light industrial type buildings, not apartment buildings, okay? So I want to make sure I make that clear in every video so that you know what I mean. Okay, so for commercial real estate investing leases, one of the biggest differences is the size, the volume of paper you have to go through, because you're generally dealing with lawyers that are putting these large leases together, and we all know that lawyers like to protect their clients as much as possible, which is wonderful, but it can be a huge pain in the you-know-what when you're going through it all, because it can be pages and pages and pages. So generally speaking, with a commercial lease, it can be anywhere from one page, which is unlikely, but it can be, all the way to 40, 50, 60, 70 pages. Versus a residential lease, you're usually looking at somewhere between one page and maybe 8 or 9 or 10 pages. At least I hope you're not doing much more than 8 or 9 or 10 pages for a residential lease. So volume alone is a big thing. The cost of putting together a commercial lease, of course, is going to be more expensive too, because you're usually involving lawyers to put the leases together. Your lawyers are chatting with your prospective tenants' lawyers, so there's more cost usually with the lawyers as well. Now, besides that, length of term. So a commercial lease typically is going to be more than a year. Usually it's going to be 3, 4, 5, maybe even 10 years with an option to renew. With residential, usually residential leases are only 1 year. You can do longer than that, but it's very uncommon, and you might not want to be stuck in a longer lease than that with your tenant residentially, because they could destroy the house. Commercially, they can too. It's just less likely to happen because a commercial tenant isn't likely to destroy your unit like a sour residential tenant might. Mostly because it's business versus personal, right? Big difference there. So that's another big difference is with the commercial leases is that they tend to be longer. Now they also can take longer to put together, not only in terms of writing them up, but in finding a tenant to put into a lease, right? Finding a commercial tenant can take you longer. It can take you 3 months, 6 months, a year. You could have vacancy, maybe even 2 or 3 years. I know a lot of commercial buildings around town, they've been empty for 5 years. Not necessarily because they're having a hard time finding the right tenant, but maybe because they want a really high lease rate and they're just not getting it. Or maybe they're just trying to find the perfect tenant, right? So again, there's a difference there with commercial real estate versus residential, is that your pool of tenants is much smaller in commercial than it is in residential, because everybody needs a place to live, but not everybody needs a place to have their business, right? So that's something to very much keep in mind when you're doing commercial real estate. So what else with leases? The length. Oh, triple net. I mentioned that in the other video, so I won't get into that too much. But big difference between commercial and residential is the triple net lease. Make sure you watch that other video because I talk in great depth about that. But it is probably the best thing about commercial real estate is the triple net lease. If you have one or you can get one versus a regular gross rent lease. That's a huge factor with commercial leases. Oh, one more is the cost if you have a property manager for commercial properties versus residential. So with commercial properties, when you are renewing a lease, say you have a tenant in place, it can cost you anywhere from about 1.5% to 2.5% of the total amount of dollars coming into you over the length of the term of the lease. So I'll give you a quick example. Say you're renewing a lease with a tenant, and they're going to pay you $100,000 over 5 years. So say $20,000 per year in terms of their triple net lease. That's a $100,000 contract, if you will. The property manager that's negotiating that on your behalf, if you have hired your property manager to do that, they will charge you, like say, the standard is about 2.5% on that. So you would have to pay your property manager, that'd be $2,500. You'd have to pay them $2,500 for just renewing that lease. If they went out and got a new tenant, they found a new tenant that was going to pay you that $100,000 over 5 years, generally it's about a 5% fee. So then you have to pay them about $5,000, and usually you have to pay it up front. And that comes out of your pocket. That doesn't generally get passed on to the tenant in a regular triple net lease, because that's your cost as the landlord. There are some large upfront costs with leasing commercial versus residential. You might have to pay half a month's rent, which might be $500, $700, maybe $1,000 to put them in a lease, which can add up, of course. But usually, again, with commercial, it's quite a bit more expensive. But one of the nice little perks, again, about commercial real estate is you can negotiate usually a little bit more with how you want to set up that lease renewal or that new lease. Like in our case, with our commercial property manager, we've actually discussed that it's just going to be an hourly rate. Instead of having a set amount, it's going to be an hourly rate for renewals, and we've discussed that, and it should come out quite a bit less than charging that 2.5% or 5% fee. We'll see what happens. We're all occupied right now, so we'll see what happens down the road. But that's the big differences with leases, commercial versus residential. Some things to keep in mind of commercial real estate investing versus residential real estate investing. We'll see you next time.